Happy holidays to one and all! I'm JT and I hope you're having a wonderful winter season this year. Maybe it's all the good vibes, the holiday cheer, the catchy holiday tunes, the beautiful snow, or the need to distract myself from the cynical outlook of capitalist America running rampant. Who knows? It could be anything! But if I had to be sincere and pick one, it'd be Christmas movies, easy. Like any kid raised with TVs, VCRs, and the cheapest available network, I watched all the classic Christmas movies. Stop motions like Santa Claus is Coming to Town and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, to animated features like Frosty the Snowman and other cartoon specials. Of course, I also watched countless live-action Christmas movies, like the Tim Allen Santa Claus movies. Yes, I know, I am deeply ashamed. But just because I love the classics doesn't mean I don't love modern hits. That new action thriller Santa Claus movie called Violent Night last year is already a favorite of mine. Though to me, the most impactful modern holiday movie has to be 2019's Netflix original, Klaus. A fun and emotional film that takes 2D designs and animates them perfectly in a 3D setting. It's one of the first movies I want to watch during the holidays, for a good reason. It's beautiful in every way, telling a unique story with unique visuals. But today, we aren't here to talk about Klaus. Instead, we're here to talk about Klaus! Now get ready for this, folks. I'm about to tell you the sickest thing you'll ever learn this Christmas. There's a comic book out there where we have Santa Claus, but he's actually a Viking Superman. That's Klaus, one of the best comics Boom Studios have ever produced. A true classic that every comic book enjoyer needs to read in their lifetime, especially around the holiday season. It's a book like you'd never expect, one that takes the icon of Santa and reimagines him as a badass Viking superhero. So right now, I need you to go and read this book. If you're a digital reader like me, the Comixology store and Kindle app are your best bet. However, for the best experience, Boom Studios just released a new Klaus graphic novel. A hardcover book with everything included. Every story and most of the BTS stuff is included in this book for a very decent price point, all things considered. To get back on track, I know, it sounds weird. Honestly, I don't feel like I'm doing this comic the justice it deserves with this kind of introduction. I read the entire series in only a few days. I could not set the story down for the life of me. I had to read as much as I could. Rarely do I ever get this invested into a story, to the point where I actively set as much time aside as I can to read it all. It's very hard to get across how special this comic is. This is one of those one-in-a-million short stories. The perfect blend of writer, artist, and influence. Every time I read the story, I get filled with a sense of wonder. And really, no figure considering the talent that worked on this book. Grant Morrison is one of the most prolific writers in comics today. The sheer impact they've had on DC Comics is among the legends of the brand. This human being has written more comics than most comic fans have ever read. Their most notable work, in my opinion, is their work on Superman, specifically a little comic known as All-Star Superman. Maybe you've heard of it! Bit of an obscure book, I know. Needless to say, Grant Morrison has a portfolio of work that's hard to match for any writer, and Klaus is yet another golden story to add to this astounding collection. Working on the book's art is my, by far, favorite artist in the entire industry. And I do not say that lightly. If you're a comic fan on Twitter these days, you pray for the day that Dan Mora decides to draw your favorite character. There's an appealing animated look to all of his art, an energy to it that draws you to every page, every panel. My favorites of his work are on Go-Go Power Rangers, World's Finest, Once and Future, and of course, Klaus. If you haven't read the comic yet and want to go on blind, I recommend stopping here. Because otherwise, as the story goes... Once upon a time, and a place, there was a man. These days, everyone knows his name, but few could tell you who he really is, or how he got started. This is the greatest untold story of them all. Klaus, how Santa Claus began. We meet the titular character of Klaus, garbed in a small red hood and carrying a sled of supplies for trade within the town of Grimsvig. A cold, lifeless, and colorless town, devoid of cheer and joy. A curious sight to Klaus, who seems oddly familiar with the old town. He can't help but question where the men are. Why do the children not play in the streets? Why do they work in times of celebration? Questions quickly lead to the discovery of just how corrupt this once amazing town has become. This story follows Klaus as he Batmans himself around, accompanied by his wolf and companion, Lily, the best wolf a man like Klaus could ever ask for. We'll get back to these two in a bit. Let's introduce some of the other pivotal characters, such as our main villain, Lord Magnus, the slimy lord of the town, who has used his intelligence and some other trickery to put the city of Grimsvig under his oppressive thumb, forcing able-bodied men into the mines for coal and allowing his corrupt army of evil soldiers to run rampant. He also made a deal with the demon. This one right here, that looks so freaking cool! They also eat children, like Magnus' son, Jonas, who's also the son of Lady Dagmar, the daughter of the town's former lord, and whom Magnus married for the position and power and twisted sense of love. Lady Dagmar is pretty fun and serves the plot well. She's a monarch who's lost touch with the people she once loved, leaving them to their fate in the hands of her, well, evil husband. It's not until Klaus re-enters her life with some pretty fun plot reveals that she realizes how distant she's become. It even leads to her becoming a better mother to Jonas and a rejection of Magnus. I also really like this army commander guy, Sergeant Linkvist. A man who thought he could change the corruption from the inside, but instead became complicit and cowardly, unable to control his men or stop the evils of Magnus. There are a few more characters sprinkled about, like this Grimsvig family, who are pretty prominent throughout the story, with both the father and son actively contributing a ton to the tone and plot. By using his skills and optimism, Klaus chips away at Magnus' rule and insanity. It's a very fun game of cat and mouse. He was inspiring hope and change throughout everyone. It's just that now, he's the strongest and most courageous hero in the world, who uses his abilities to slay the monster, save the children, and returns Grimsvig to the shining town it once was. Through the story, we also get fun origins to the traditional Santa stuff we all know and love, like toys being delivered through fireplaces, the naughty and nice list, ho ho ho, and the reindeer! I mean wolves! Oh my god, it's so cool, wolves! But our story doesn't end there, my friends. After Klaus finished its initial run, Grant Morrison and Dan Mora would come back a grand total of 4 times with new stories to tell with Klaus. Klaus and the Witch of Winter, Klaus and the Crisis of Xmasville, Klaus and the Crying Snowman, and finally, Klaus and the Life and Times of Joe Christmas. 4 new stories, each one a standalone tale in the long, immortal life of Klaus. Now, I'll admit, as someone who is late to the Klaus game, these stories took me off guard. I wasn't sure if I was really a fan of them, because they're all so disconnected from each other. When I started to read The Witch of Winter, I was genuinely confused. The story doesn't hold back to explain anything of Klaus's new history. We're just plopped into the modern day with an all-new Klaus, and are expected to just kind of roll with it. We'll read phrases and references to things that have no context behind them, like a civil war on the moon that kept Klaus trapped for decades. The Battle of Pola Colacorp. Also just all of this. It's a bit insane, and I think that hurts the first book's overall narrative. So much is thrown at you with some questionable exposition that you have to try to ignore a lot of it to see the story Grant Morrison is trying to tell. Yet still, I think that when we do get to the actual story, there's a very nice message about love and grief. So despite the rest of the narrative being very confused and disjointed, there's still a lot of charm and love to be had here. And I found myself feeling the same way towards the next story, Crisis in Xmasville. Immediately you can tell the story is much more structured and focused than the last. There's a much stronger narrative at play that remains very consistent. It's still disconnected from everything that came before. This story, for example, is incredibly rereadable. It tells you everything you need to know about Klaus and his connection to the world and the story in this seamless fashion. You can pick up this book and enjoy superhero Santa Claus fighting against his evil counterpart with ease. Said evil counterpart talks like a pirate, and is actually so cartoonishly menacing and evil that you can't help but enjoy him. Cool character aside, I found myself really liking A Crisis in Xmasville a lot more on reread. It's a clear and concise story about Klaus fighting for the right of children's imagination, told beautifully. There's even a narration during the story from the perspective of one of the kidnapped children. The voice speaks of how they see and hear of Klaus, his desperate struggle to save them, and how he accomplishes the impossible time after time again. It is a really marvelous story, perhaps a bit short, but still very fun to read. Now logically, we should move on to The Crying Snowman, but I'll save that one for last, as it's my personal favorite of the bunch, and the life and times of Joe Christmas doesn't require much review. Why, you ask? Because this story is a calendar. Entire double full-page spreads dedicated to telling the life of Joe Christmas in reverse. Day 1 starts at the end, while day 25 is when Klaus finds an orphan baby boy, who he befriends later in life. Grant Morrison did a ton as the writer here, I'm sure, but the real star on display is Dan Mora's art. I won't show every spread, but my god, I encourage everyone to take a second to really look at these fully detailed pages. I have the story in hardcover edition, and they are beautiful. Every page is breathtaking in its own right, and the wordless storytelling on display is tremendous. It's a breeze to get through if you're just scrolling by looking at the pretty pictures, but if you take a closer look and see the tale behind it, that's when the life and times of Joe Christmas becomes something truly special. However, for as good as that story, and every other one that we've talked about so far are, none are as good to me as Klaus and the Crying Snowman. Up until now, all these sequel stories to Klaus have been relatively solid. I've enjoyed them on both a visual and narrative level, but I wasn't entirely in love. It took ignoring a lot of the fluff in the dialogue and story to get connected to the characters and concepts. So when I got to the Crying Snowman, with the intent of really looking at it, I was surprised with just how much I loved this story. Through the story, we follow the titular Klaus and the Crying Snowman, Sam. This is yet another all-new invention of the Klaus character, with a whole new design and slight unknown additions to their story. Again, another version we have to get used to. But he's so cool, cooler than he's ever been! With that classic charm and character to him, he's at an all-new level right now. In this story, Klaus is faced with old myths coming to wage a war against the Earth and its defenders. The giants and monsters of Norse mythology are reimagined as a race of aliens who once did battle against the Aesir long before even Klaus's time. Responsible for killing the old gods, they now return, and it's up to Klaus, his allies, and Sam to stop them. But is everything as simple as it seems? No, not at all, never that simple. Klaus knows this. Klaus also knows that he sees the tall, talking, walking snowman with a tree for an arm. This is Sam. He's a snowman. He wasn't always one, though. Rose in an accident involving a tree monster Klaus stopped. Now he's trapped in the body of a snowman, lost and confused about who he is. How he was a man who often worked instead of spending time with his family, and how he cheated on his wife. As Sam discovers what a horrible person he was, he starts to eject the memories. He doesn't want to remember. In the end, with Klaus officially becoming comics' #1 DILF, he and Sam stand before a beautiful sunrise. It's a beautiful story about second chances and why they're important. The Nightboard needed a second chance. Sam needed a second chance. Not for themselves, but for the people important in their lives. All because of the most optimistic man alive, Klaus. This story is amazing. It's thrilling, with some of Dan Mora's best illustrations yet. And Grant Morrison hammering down on what they want this series to be. I even think this story could be better than the 7-issue miniseries that started all of this. Klaus is just that fascinating of a character, and this narrative is just that thought-provoking and interesting. Upon my reread for this video, I got so invested in the thought process behind all of these sequels that I went looking for interviews, and what I found is gold. To quote Grant Morrison from an interview with Chris Sims on the website Comics Alliance, "To me it was less Superman and more Doctor Who. Every year they do a Doctor Who Christmas special and it's all very different, with different characters, and I thought of Klaus as that kind of character, who can appear in different genre stories, horror stories or fantasy stories. There's so much potential in the character to be very different." I've linked the rest of the interview down below if you want to read it. I highly recommend doing so. Grant Morrison's interviews are notoriously amazing for a variety of reasons, and Chris Sims asks some very interesting questions that lead to a lot of insight. But the reason I chose this quote specifically is because I think it nails down the thought process behind the direction they took Klaus's story, especially when Grant Morrison cited Doctor Who's Christmas specials as inspirations. It helped me understand the story choices a lot more and even appreciate the ones made in earlier books. The idea of a character who can plop into any era and write any story with is exciting. The way he's structured has so much potential and room for creativity, and Grant Morrison talks as if they plan to do this for a very long time. Not sure if that's the case anymore. As of 2019, with the release of The Life and Times of Joe Christmas, there hasn't been any new Klaus stories. The most we've gotten have been re-released graphic novel editions, with the latest one being the complete package that I advertised at the start of this video. Don't get me wrong, these are all fantastic, quality books in their own right. But I do miss Klaus. I believe his stories filled a very specific niche in comics, and his absence is sorely felt. I just hope that someday we get a new one, because I've come to love this character and his wonderful world full of excitement, danger, and the unimaginable made real. I've come to love Klaus, and after this video, I hope I've convinced you to take a look, and see if you love him the same way I do. Until the next time, this has been JT, signing off. Happy holidays, everyone. I'll see you people in the next video. Bye-bye!